multiscale guitars. As a builder myself and doing things by hand, when I first thought of doing multiscale fretboards, it did scare me a little bit. It must be a little bit different. It must be more difficult to do. Well, I was a little bit mistaken from that. Sure, there's a lot of very fine details that you need to take into account, and I made a video about this many moons ago. However, there are some discrepancies and quality issues with the video that I have posted and so many of you have watched. So here is a revamped 2024 version of how to cut a multiscale fretboard by hand. Let's check it out, how these two guitars were made. Alrighty, so first things first, the first thing to start with is, well, gathering up everything that we'll need. Of course, we will need our fretboard blank. We will need a ruler, long enough ruler to actually have, well, however long of a scale length you're doing. I really love using these metal rulers, which are like a meter long. So they have inches on one side, millimeters on one side. That really helps out whenever I'm working with scale lengths, because I tend to use both. For getting all the placements on the fretboard, all the fret lines, fret marks, I will use millimeters always, because that's just what I know, and I will be able to get a little bit more accurate, more closer to where I want. And then inches whenever I'm checking the overall scale length of whatever I'm working with. So a good, long, accurate ruler. This one is a Faithful stainless steel ruler. Amazing. I'll put a link in the description so you can go and check this out for yourself. And there's a conversion table on the back as well, just in case you need it. For any fret work being done by hand, I cannot recommend this enough. So the Incra Rules stainless steel protractor, this thing is a complete beast, a worthy investment whenever doing anything like this. Definitely worth every single penny. Of course, mechanical pencil goes a long way, as thin as you can get it. Eraser, trust me, you're gonna need that anyway. Going to need a scalpel, another knife to kind of open up the fret slots when we get there. Of course, a fretting saw. This one is from TLC Guitar Goods. It's a PAX. PAX fretting saw. You can get these from a couple of different suppliers. One of my favorite ones that I've run into, although I wish this handle was a bit different like that. I might make a new handle for it at some point. I'm going to use a backing for cutting things out, just so I don't damage my table. You're also going to need charts for your scale lengths that you're going to be using. I have never gone wrong with the Melvin Hiscock make your own electric guitar. This guitar is like one of the best starting points if you're starting to get into guitar building. And rip Melvin Hiscock, who passed away not so long ago. Amazing luthier, amazing guy. And this book is something that every single luthier should have in their bookshelf. On the back of it, there is a bunch of different charts, both in imperial and in metric, for different kinds of scale lengths. And then there's how to build a couple of different kinds of instruments. Another handy tool, tape. And I think we're ready to start. So I'm going to start off with just getting this fretboard taped up onto the board here. So I'll be right back. Now we have our fretboard properly in place and being held in place so that it's not going to move anywhere. If you were to be cutting just a standard singular scale length guitar, we would have a Centerline, which we're also going to do here, but the Centerline is kind of what we base everything on. However, now that we have two separate scale lengths, we need to take a few different things into account. First and foremost, this is now going to be a 26.5 to 27 inch scale. So on this side, we're going to have the 26.5, And on this side, we're going to have the 27-inch. In order for us to figure out where we're going to place everything, we need to figure out where the parallel fret is going to be. Now, this is the fret that is going to be completely parallel at 90-degree angle to the center line. And from there, the fan is going to go in either direction. Now, what I'm going to start with here is I'm going to mark out the distance from the nut to the 24th fret and a little bit over, so the end of the fretboard for the 27-inch, and then mark out where I want that parallel fret to be, and then we'll go from there. I'll show you what I mean. What we are going to check on our chart here is for the 27-inch scale length, we are going to find that our 24th fret is at 514.4, and we're going to add just a little bit on top of that to give us the end of the fretboard. Personally, I like to add 4 mil, and then there's going to be still the binding if you're going to be using binding. So what we're looking for here then is 518. So this way we also figure out how much we have to work with. And essentially, because I'm going to have a scooped headstock, personally I want to keep as much of the nut end of the fretboard as possible. I won't need that much of the tail end. So we can move this all the way to 518 and a half, which is right there, which gives us that as the nut line. So here is the nut, where the nut is going to be placed on the 27. Tape this ruler down so it doesn't move. Make sure that it is on spot there. And then we're going to find what our 9th fret is. So our 9th fret on the 27-inch side is 278.05. So 278 right here. So that is where we want our parallel fret to be. So, time to figure out the center line. There's one point, and then we're going to check another point to connect to. So it's there. Right. And then we're just going to join up that line. Always keep a close eye on where things are. So now, just by looking at by eye, this doesn't look quite right to me, so I'm going to check and adjust as needed. So now, yeah, looks like this didn't go straight enough. So we're going to take here, where we had everything marked out in the middle. And always, if you need to draw something again, get rid of any and all excess lines so you don't get confused along the way. Now it's going to be very difficult to see what I'm doing because it is, you know, normal pencil on a ebony fretboard, but I'm going to try my best here. So there. All right, let's try that out for size. So there, and there. There we go. So now we have our center line. Yep, that looks great. And here we marked out where the 9th fret is. Now we can always double check that before we go any further. So we have our nut line, and it was 278. Yep. So now we're going to put in the parallel fret. So with our trusty protractor, I'm going to find the center line. and the mark we put in for the 9th fret already, and voila, there we are. There we have it. So now we have a great starting point to go from. One thing that you do really need to be very wary of whenever you're going to start marking out frets is that now that I have this fretboard blank here, if I mark out 26.5 on this side and 27 on this side, it'll be pretty okay. However, that's not where the scale length is going to hit. Your scale length and your intonation points, which means the tops of your frets, is of course where you want the string to land. So in order for us to get accurate intonation already at this point, we want to ensure that where we mark our fret lines will be in accordance with where that string is going to hit that fret. So for instance, now this is still going to get 1.5. It's hard to write upside down. Hold on. This is still going to get 1.5 mil binding on either side, which means that there's going to be 3 mil binding altogether for that amount. So it's going to be 3 mil binding that we need to take into account for the width of the fretboard. What I would usually do is when creating a nut for a guitar, I would get my high E string 3.5 millimeters in, and then my top bass string or my lowest bass string, I would put 4 mil in from the other side. So that is where we want to start with. So what we're going to do here is I am going to figure out where the strings are going to sit. So just the highest and the lowest string. So we're going to take the 1.5 millimeters that we have, deduct 4 millimeters on this side, and then deduct 3.5 millimeters from the other side. So what that will give us is 2 mil on the treble side, and then on the bass side, of course, that will give us 2.5 millimeters. So that's our starting point. So I'm going to mark for my bass to be 2.5 millimeters from the side of the fretboard, like so. Join that line. And then 2 millimeters on the treble side there, here. There we are. That gives us the line onto which we're going to mark each and every single fret position. Now, we've already pretty much figured out where we want the 27-inch to land, which is basically all the way from here to this point, all the way to the very end here. Now, in order for us to figure out where our 26.5-inch scale length is going to land, we're once again going to have to find the 9th fret, which is 272.885 is the absolute accurate position of that. So we're going to find 2.28. So that will be there. And we're going to make sure that we're lined up here. Now we have the nut line, 9th fret, and we need to find where the 24th fret and the end of the fretboard are going to land. So the 24th fret is 504.8, and if you remember, we added 4 millimeters to that, so 508.8. 508.8, which is right there. And that essentially now gives us both ends of the fretboard. Let's join those lines up. For our knot line here, we are going to put it right there. Now here you can see the difference, that now that we have the fret line going where the strings are going to be, so from the high E to the low B, this is going to be a 7 string. If we were to have drawn that line from the edge of the fretboard or the blank of wood that we're working here, we would have got a line that went from here to here, which would look like this. While it's not a drastic change right now at this part right here, it does make a difference throughout the entire fan as we go along, because these aren't then going to be the absolute accurate 27-inch and 26.5-inch scale lengths. I don't know what the fractions of these would be when we're working with imperial, but with metric, those are going to be a few millimeters off throughout the fretboard, and that's not something that we want. Due to having a fender style nut here, we're just gonna put that in at 3 mil mark here. There, much better. Right, so now we're good to actually start putting both sides of the fretboard on here. I'm just going to do the very end of the fretboard here, so I know to cut that off when the time comes. There we go. So without further ado, we can start on both sides of the fretboard here. Let's start with a 26.5-inch, just so we have the millimeters the correct way around from my point of view. So we're going to redo our tape, just so we have fresh tape that sticks a bit better. Gonna add a couple of pieces of this, maybe a third in the middle, just to keep things lined up nicely. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna line this up from the knot line to the end of the fretboard here. That is going to be there, double checking the end. We do have it indeed correctly. Yes, we do. So place that down. Sure it doesn't move. I'm gonna put another piece of tape right here, and then the last remaining piece of tape at the very end there. Right, so now we can get to work and start looking through our list of fret positions. So first one, 37.7 there. And yes, of course, you're never going to be, when doing this by hand, you're never going to be getting it to the umpteenth decimal point, but you can figure out on which side of a line, which side of half of a line you're going to be actually getting. So as close as you can, just take your time. No need to rush through this, and do it carefully, slowly, and we'll get there. 138.86. It's essentially, you have the full number. So in this case, I'm going to be doing 138 millimeters, 0.86. The 8 already gives me an idea that it's going to be closer to 139, and the 6 after the 8 gives me a little bit more, also toward that being 0.9 instead of 0.8. So I know that I'm very much leaning more toward going to 1.39, but not quite. So 138.86. So we're almost at 139. All right, so now we have the first side done. And we can move on to the second side here. Now, once we have both sides marked out, this is where the fun begins. We start connecting the lines and seeing if we even got close. So let's have a closer look at that. So I know this is gonna be kind of tricky to see on camera, but I'm gonna line up, once again, making sure that I line up where my actual strings are going to hit instead of, the sides of the fretboard here or the sides of the piece of the wood that I'm working with. So there and there. First one. And then again, just, take your time. Having a really good light source is absolutely key here, so you can see what you're doing. And slowly but surely, we'll start to see that fan start to turn toward that perpendicular fret on the 9th there. Now you start seeing that fan going the other direction. Now, bear in mind that there is really no kind of set rule of thumb, but the most common place that you would have the parallel fret is the 9th fret. I forgot to mention that earlier, but that is essentially where the most common place would be, which gives you a bit more of a, I guess, more ergonomic of a feel for the playing. Usually you don't tend to go for anything that's, over an inch of difference between the two. I'm doing only half an inch difference, so that's why the fan is so gradual. But usually an inch difference is pretty much more standard, more so. But anything over that, the fan will start to spread quite a bit, which will also mean that your hand starts turning the other way when you're starting to play, which is also not ideal. The previous time that I did this video, I remember I put the parallel fret on the 12th. This was my first time doing this, so that was indeed a little weird. And I believe it was a 26 to a 28 inch scale length. So there was 2 inches difference there. So that was quite a large fan, and it was only starting, the fan was going from the 12th fret and really starting to fall downwards toward the first frets, and then a bit more of a milder fan on the opposite side here. So 9th fret, yeah, for multiple purposes or multiple reasons is usually thought of as more ergonomic in this case, or because of this reason. Right, so now that we have everything marked out in pencil, laid out in front of us, what we're gonna do now is what tends to be the most tedious portion of, well, this, which is going to be scoring our fret lines. So what that means is taking a sharp scalpel blade, and I will say that again, taking a sharp scalpel blade, and now the lines that we have drawn, I drew these with a 0.5 mil mechanical pencil, so it's a bit of a thicker line. But what I'm now going to do, or at least attempt to do, is score the middle of that pencil line. And to do that, I'm going to use the protractor as a guide here. This is also one of the reasons why I love steel rulers. And one of the key factors of any type of scalpel work or scoring wood or marking or cutting anything with a knife, you don't want to do too big of a cut immediately. More than likely you're going to bounce all over the place because we're talking about wood here, so the blade is going to follow the path of least resistance. So what you're going to do is you're going to keep putting in small scores like this. Let's see if I can try and film this. It's hard to film because my hand's in the way. I turn this around. So yeah, scoring just like this. That wasn't that clean, but it's the back of the nut here. All right, I'll do it this way so maybe you can see a bit better. So I'm gonna line up and then rest the blade up against the steel ruler here so it acts as a sort of fence. And ta-da. Now, before we move in with the saw, we need to open those up a little bit. So I'm just going to do the first fret here as well, just to reiterate. So line up the ruler and score the wood. 3, 4, 5 swipes is what I did there. And now I'm going to take a blade that has a bit of, well, a bigger cut to it, or it's not duller, but it's just a bit thicker of a blade, so it's going to open that slot up ever so slightly so the saw has an easier time tracking. Now to do this, I'm not going to be using the guide anymore. I'm just going to let this blade follow the cut that I have already made. So definitely don't want to apply too much pressure here. And I'm keeping as many digits and fingers, you know, holding down and holding on to the blade here so it doesn't wander, just so I have a good grip on it. Find the groove. And slowly but surely bring it through. I'm gonna do only a couple of swipes with this, just enough to open everything up. Maybe 3. There we go. And you can feel pretty well when you're hitting that groove, so you won't wander too much. There we go. There. So now I've opened up the nut slot and the first fret here, and I'm going to repeat the process for the remainder of the frets, and we'll come back in just a moment. Now we get to cutting the actual fret slots. Now what we're first going to do is we're going to make sure that we're going to get everything to the right depth So I'm just gonna apply a little bit of masking tape to my fret saw here. And we're gonna cut things to that depth right there. Now, at this point, I cannot recommend this enough. This is a recent thing that I found to work extremely well. So I bought, at first for inlay purposes, I bought Tap Ease metal cutting lubricant from Stu Mac, I believe. And I found that this stuff is freaking amazing for just any sort of sawing work. So while I do use this for inlays and stuff like this, putting a little bit of this on here makes things a hell of a lot easier when cutting even fret slots. So the way that we're gonna start this is I'm gonna start on each side, like so, and then I'm gonna join those lines up in the middle. Now, the PAX fret slotting saws, they are pull cuts. So they're not gonna be cutting when you're going forward, so it's only gonna cut when we're pulling backwards. So in order to get that first cut in there, I'm just gonna, there, gently ease it in, like so. And then we can start to cut. Now I'm gonna use my finger here as a sort of guide to make sure that I'm cutting things square to the fretboard instead of letting the saw wander like this and making the actual slot open up. So starting off here, the back of the nut, or actually I should say front of the nut, depending on your point of view. There we go. So that is now the first cut that we have made, and we're gonna keep on doing this for the rest. Now I'm gonna cut this back of the nut here as well, and then I'm gonna continue on with all our frets. So again, you don't really want to add any pressure and just let the saw do the work for you. Having a good steady work surface is beyond question the best way to do this. I have, well, an electronic table which does wiggle a bit when I'm sawing, but we'll get around that anyway. So we'll be just fine. Now, if you do have the metal cutting lubricant and you feel like the saw is starting to get stuck, just add a little bit, like just that much. Don't need any more than that. And keep going. And there we have the nut slot cut. And yeah, let's do the rest of the frets. This is, once again, something that takes a little bit of time to do, but just go about it at a easy pace. Don't try and rush through this, because if you screw something up here, it's really gonna bite you in the ass. So just take your time, do it carefully, do it at a steady pace. Always remember to kind of make sure that you're keeping your blade, the saw blade, square to what you're cutting, to make sure that you're getting the cut that you need. And keep going. All right. I don't know what my light cut out, but we'll see. Whew, let's clean up a little bit. All right, so yeah, you did see my shirt change there in the time lapse, or when the time lapse started. That's because I started this video yesterday, didn't have time to finish it, so I finished it today. Anywho, let's get this fretboard off here. For those ever in doubt of the super glue and masking tape trick actually holding things down, it really does. And there we have it, the 27 to 26.5 inch multiscale fretboard, cut by hand, all ready to go for the next stage, which for me will be putting on binding and then gluing onto the neck. Now, as mentioned previously in the video, I have made a video about this in the past, which you can check out here if for some reason you will want to check, you know, how differently I did things back then. There's only a couple of things here that I kind of wanted to update, most of which was, as previously I mentioned, that the parallel fret more commonly would be on the 9th fret. I didn't know that in the past, I do know that now. So that is the case here. Now, when it comes to the parallel fret, technically you could put that anywhere at all. Now, for instance, here is a fretboard that I prepared earlier. Now, this is a 25.5 inch to a 26 inch scale length fretboard. Now, you might notice that these two fretboards look a little different. Now, the one that we just cut, the parallel fret, was on the 9th fret, and the one that I have prepared earlier, the parallel fret is actually the nut. So the fan starts here and starts falling toward the bridge. Technically, you could do this the other way around as well, where you have your parallel right where your intonation point is at the scale length, and then have that start going down from there. Now, bear in mind, whenever you do have either at the nut or at the bridge, you do want to keep the difference between the two scale lengths that you're using fairly minimal. Any large gaps and that fan will really start to turn by the time you reach either end. So I am very happy, very pleased with these two fairly light, you know, fanning of the frets here, and I can't wait to make two guitars out of this. So yes, there will be a 6-string, and yes, there will be a 7-string, and you will find out more about these later on if you haven't already. So thank you very much for watching this video. Be sure to check out other videos. Be sure to check out other videos that I have done in the past, and have a great rest of the day and go make some sawdust. I've been Tomster. Thank you for watching.